Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our July Mitchell Hour. We're extremely fortunate and pleased to have with us General C.Q. Brown, the commander of Pacific Air Forces today. Based on the standing room only audience, I think you all heard about that. As everybody in this room knows, the United States faces threats today, the likes of which we haven't seen since the end of the Cold War. Nation-state competitors, especially China, are redefining what it means for America to secure its interests, empower allies, and deter our adversaries. Now, doing this with an Air Force that's smaller and older than at any point in its history is far from an easy task. Now, Pacific Air Forces stands as a key linchpin when it comes to providing defense leadership effective, smart options in this new era. And in talking with General Brown a little bit beforehand, you know, he reminded me that the perspectives that evolve and options that evolve inside the D.C. environment sometimes need to be informed by folks coming in from outside that environment, and that's one of the reasons that he's here. Now, General Brown needs a little introduction before this audience, but let me hit the highlights. He's commanded a fighter squadron, the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, 2 fighter wings, and the U.S. Air Force's Central Command. Prior to his current assignment, he served as Deputy Commander, U.S. Central Command. So please join me in welcoming General Brown.
Five, 44, and 60. Those are 3 numbers that I think each one of us need to be paying attention to. It's something I pay attention to every day. It's numbers that keep me and my PACAF team kind of focused on what it is we need to do. I think those numbers actually also are providing us unprecedented opportunity to make monumental changes with some small actions. Now, as some of you may know, I had a few assignments in the Pacific. I've been to Kunsan twice, and now as the commander of PACAF. But I will tell you, those 2 assignments to Kunsan probably did not prepare me for what I see right now as a PACAF commander. And I didn't really have the full appreciation, one, for the scope and size of the AOR. And as it's been described, and I think Admiral Harris, the previous PACON commander, described it, we go from Hollywood all the way to Bollywood, polar bears to penguins. And I've been pretty much seen most of all that in the time that I've been in command. But I will tell you that with that distance, there's a number of cultural differences in adversaries, difference in perspectives. But again, those challenges provide some unparalleled opportunities. And so today I'd like to discuss some of those opportunities by describing the Indo-Pacific strategy, the PACAF strategy, kind of how we recharacterize the region under Admiral Davidson, and how we're implementing those strategies. But before I go any further, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And as Dave Deptulli described, one of the reasons when I come back to D.C. and other locations or on the East Coast is to maybe spend a little time talking about the Pacific, because we're a long ways away, and we tend to look the other direction, look east towards Europe and to the Middle East. And I think it's important that I spend a little time talking about the AOR that I'm in right now. And so to Dave and the Mitchell Institute, really appreciate the opportunity. Orville and Secretary, thank you so much. And really to everybody who's here today, it's a real honor and pleasure to spend a little time with you this morning. Now, both of our national defense strategy and the national security strategy and the national defense strategy identify strategic competition as our primary challenge to our military advantage. So 5. 5 is the first number I talked about. In the national defense strategy, there's outlined 5 challenges. And in those 5 challenges and threats, 4 of those can be found in the Indo-Pacific region. But I go back to 5 because I'll add a +1, the environment, which I'll talk about here in just a few minutes. You know, 2 of the 5 are great power competitors, both China and Russia, revisionist powers that want to shape the world consistent with their authoritarian model, gaining veto authority over other nations, both in all the different elements of economic, diplomatic, and security decisions. I will tell you, China is our primary focus, and I'll talk a little bit more in more detail momentarily. Russia, you look at it, and it may be considered more of a EUCOM or a NORTHCOM concern or issue. But I'll tell you, there's a NORTHCOM mission up in Alaska that's supported with PACAF assets. And so I'm intertwined very closely with what happens in NORTHCOM because it impacts the capabilities, and I'm on the dime to actually provide those capabilities to support General O'Shaughnessy in his job for Homeland Defense. I'll also say that some of our partners see this with the Russians and their activity in the Pacific, and just a recent example here when they married up with the H-6s and the Tu-95s to come down and around Japan. And so our Japanese partners are particularly interested in some of the long-range aviation. North Korea is a constant attention from a diplomatic standpoint. I pay attention to that aspect because it impacts the things that we may have to do on a military aspect associated with that. And then there's non-state actors and violent extremists. They have an opportunity to gain footholds within the region, particularly in areas that they're underdeveloped or less governed. And so it's important for us to pay attention to that. And let me talk to you now about the plus one. The plus one to me is the environment. And when I look at it, it's the Arctic, which is not my AOR, but it's kind of a precursor to the way I look at the Antarctic. And the capabilities that we have in the Arctic are the same capabilities we probably want to have in the Antarctic to support that. And so when I look at the competition in the melting ice in the Arctic and kind of the competition both with Russia and China declaring itself a near Arctic nation, although it's quite a ways from the Arctic, I've got to pay attention to that. I also pay attention to the Antarctic, and I think it's just maybe a number of years behind. 2048 is when the treaty for Antarctica is due to expire and up for review, and both China and Russia have a presence in the Antarctic. Right now, we want to keep it free and open for research, and I want to make sure, part of that goal is to ensure that everybody's motives are all on the same way, same day, to keep it free and open for research. And then the other is natural disasters. In the Pacific, we got the Ring of Fire, and you've got volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis. I've had 5 assignments to Florida, and I will tell you, in the year that I've been in this job, I've spent more time tracking typhoons than the 5 assignments that I've had in Florida tracking hurricanes. And I'll tell you, it's something that impacts us on a day-to-day basis that we got to pay attention to, and we're kind of in the season right now. And I'll tell you today, as I looked at our intel, there's 3 of them kind of brewing already. The good part, there's a lot of ocean, so it misses a lot of landfall, but it's things we got to pay attention to as we look forward. And so at Pacific Air Forces, we find ourselves front and center when it comes to this kind of the great power competition. And make no doubt that what I see is the range of capabilities from the Chinese, both maritime and air capabilities that continue to grow and make our forward bases even more vulnerable. In addition to that, as you're fully aware, China has militarized the features in the South China Sea. The Belt and Road Initiative executes predatory economics, and they tend to coerce and intimidate some of our partners in our region. And they really seek to undermine the rules-based international order that's been around since World War II. In the binary terms of peace and war are being replaced by competition, and really competition below the level of armed conflict. Now, in June, the DoD released the Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, and that document was the first and foremost recognized Indo-Pacific as a priority theater. And I'll repeat that, it is the priority theater. And that's the challenge we have sometimes. It may be the priority theater, and we got to look long-term, but sometimes the shorter-term things that take our attention away from this long-term strategic competition that I think we really did need to be paying attention to. It really reaffirmed the U.S. commitment to the stability and prosperity in the region by pursuing preparedness, partnerships, and promoting a networked region. Achieving that Indo-Pacific vision requires an integrated effort and appreciates the linkages between economics, governance, and security. The Indo-Pacific report aspires to outline the path that guarantees peace and prosperity within the region for all nations. And echoing the idea from Admiral Davis that he's talked about a number of times, expressed a vision of preservation of a free and open Pacific as his top priority. He's actually talked about it quite extensively, and peace is and stability in the region is made possible by the willingness of free nations to work together with the U.S. and also the combat forces we have postured in the region help us do that. And as a result, PACAF's approach in support of the Indo-Pacific strategies and Indo-PACOM strategies centers around maintaining our military advantage across the full spectrum, from cooperation to conflict. 44% of the world's trade is tied to the Indo-Pacific region. In a global economy where the international community actually plays a role in preserving rules-based international order, we need all nations to remain independent and strong. Well, we live in a free and open Indo-Pacific, a safe, secure, and prosperous region, free of coercion, benefiting all nations, with the ability to fly, sell, and operate anywhere international law allows. To support the free and open Indo-Pacific, the PACAF strategy is concentrating on agility, resilience, and a long-term strategic competition. And so our strategy has 3 lines of effort, very much in line with the national defense strategy. Strengthening alliances and recruiting new partners, enhancing lethality and interoperability, and operational concepts for great power competition. Now, our first line of effort, and really I think quite possibly the most important line of effort, is strengthening alliances and recruiting new partners. In both conflict and cooperation, we aren't alone. We work with our allies and our partners by uniting our mutual values, interests, and security to preserve a peace and stability in the region. At PACAF, we use these engagements with our allies and partners to expand the competitive space and continually assess our partner nations in terms of alignment of mutual interest, capability, and interoperability. I believe every training event, every key leader engagement is an opportunity to demonstrate excellence, to build on a relationship, and to stimulate daily competition that will strengthen alliances and recruit new partners. Now, I'll tell you in my career, one of the things I've learned the most effective way to strengthen alliances and recruit new partners is, regardless of the region, is through presence and personal engagement. And some of you know I've spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East. What I joke with my staff about is that in my last job, I drank a lot of tea. In this job, it's sake, soju, and an occasional Mai Tai. Because I don't spend much time in Hawaii, so it's usually sake and soju. But this is why I travel so much. It's really a chance to go engage with our like-minded nations that share our values, share our security interests and concerns. And that's why I emphasize with our airmen, for every engagement we have, from my level down to our most junior airmen, every engagement we have with our partners is highly important. For the second line of effort, we focus on enhancing lethality and interoperability through exercise and our training. Now, our airmen engage in a number of exercises throughout the course of the year, and we have about 40 different exercises from kind of the high end to the lower end. So the exercises that we share with our partners can be flying training exercises, command post exercises, tabletop exercises, humanitarian assistance type training, but that runs the full spectrum. What we really do with our exercises, we try to focus on our readiness and optimize the international engagements to build partner capacity. We have high-end multinational exercises like Red Flag Alaska, executed at JPARC at the Joint Pacific Alaska Range Complex. We have smaller bilateral exercises that can be either fighter-type exercises or mobility-type exercises with our partners. And then we also leverage a number of subject matter expert exchanges where I send small teams, and I'd say it's cheaper to send 6 people than it is 6 aircraft. And you may get more out of it by having the face-to-face interaction to walk and talk about our respective problems and issues we want to work through together. The other thing I really depend on as well is our National Guard and our state partnership program. And they have those long-term relationships with mutual interest with some of our partners that I can't do in the short time that I'll be in this job. And so it's really important that we leverage the capabilities that they have and what they're able to do for us. And we also as we look at our partners, we also recognize they have varying levels of interoperability. It ranges from just having the same aircraft and equipment to actually same aircraft, same equipment, same tactics, techniques, and procedures where we can operate and execute seamlessly. And so we've got to be prepared to work that full spectrum. As we build our exercise program each year, we continually assess these exercises and what they produce. And what I tell my staff, in some cases they produce readiness. In other cases, we get nothing out of it. You know, our operators will complain to me that, hey, you're sending me this exercise and I'm getting nothing out of it. I go, it's not about you. It's about building that relationship. So in the future, when some of us are out of uniform, we'll have that relationship long term. We'll have that capability long term. We'll have that access long term, and that's why it's important. And for our third line of effort, we're taking a close look at our operating concepts and changing how we execute in the light of great power competition. Now, the AR of our size really requires us to think differently, and we got to be lighter and leaner. We do not have roads and railroads to move capability like my partner, General Harrigan, does in Europe. And so what I look at is how do we get lighter and leaner to be able to execute. And the cornerstone of that is agile combat employment. And you've probably heard folks talk about it, agile combat employment or ACE. ACE really is a mindset. It's an ability to operate from locations of varying levels of capacity and capability and support, ensuring that our airmen are postured in a position of advantage to generate combat power. We're working through some of the details, okay? And I realize that there's some challenges associated with it, but I can either go after ACE or I can sit back and do nothing. Doing nothing for me is not an option, okay? And so it's important for us to continue to move the ball forward because I think it's important for us to be able to do that to ensure that free and open Indo-Pacific. And all this kind of supports my three priorities: ready, resilient, and posture of the future. We got to be ready to cooperate, ready to compete, and ready to fight. We got to be resilient, both operationally and how we take care of our airmen and our families. And we got to be ready to fight tonight, ready to fight next week, next month, next year, next decade. And I think that's my job, my primary job, is make sure we set ourselves up for success whenever the time might come. 60% of the world's population lives within the Indo-Pacific theater. As you might imagine, in a region as vast as the Indo-Pacific, there's regional perspectives vary greatly. As a result, to implement the Indo-Pacific strategy, it's necessary to view the theater through a lens of 4 subregions, each with a unique goal, and we're taking steps to do that. And Admiral Davidson kind of laid this out in his testimony, and what I want to do is kind of walk you through how, at least I've done some of this in some of my travels. And so it's reorient Northeast Asia, strengthen Southeast Asia, secure Oceania, and create opportunities in South Asia. So when we talk about reordering Northeast Asia, we're really focused on North Korea and also a bit of China and Russia. And so I've had multiple engagements with Japan and South Korea. And they're both strong allies and really encourage them to maintain a bit of stability in the region. Despite maybe some of the diplomatic things you might see, I think on a military aspect we have very good cooperation with both nations. One of the key parts is they're both F-35 partners. And Korea just got their first F-35s here this spring. Japan has had theirs for a bit of time, and so now we have about 30 F-35s within the region. Okay, and that's United States Marine Corps, Japan, Australia, and Korea. By 2025, we'll have over 220 F-35s in the region. And we get our first F-35s, United States Air Force, in the region at Eielson here within the next year. When you do all the math, the key part of this is that 70% of the F-35s that will be in the Indo-Pacific will be owned by our partners, not by the United States. And so to me, that's why interoperability and how we work with our partners will be really important as we work with and kind of get down the path of a 5th generation mindset. Strengthening Southeast Asia. When I looked at Southeast Asia, the thing I look at is the closer you are, the further you swing west and south in our AOR, the more challenging it gets because they're probably less vocal about China. And what I really look at is not what they say, but what they do. And part of this is how we work and strengthen ASEAN and expand some of the multilateral approaches that inside of Southeast Asia. And so I went to Indonesia here back in December. We're celebrating this past year 70 years of a relationship with Indonesia. They fly F-16s now. They're looking at other things, U.S. platforms that they want to bring forward. We work very closely with them, humanitarian assistance, disaster response. They had an earthquake and tsunami last fall, and we work very closely with them as they approach that problem set, as well as working through information sharing. I've been to Singapore a couple times. They're a very strong partner, very capable partner, and as you know, they have more training in the United States than any other nation, and they're pretty effective in how they do stuff. I had a chance to go to Malaysia and to their maritime and aerospace exposition. And what they're really trying to do now is they've got a diverse set of capability, and I talked to the air chief just last week, and then what they're trying to do is actually kind of downsize and be a little more logistically smart about how they do things. And some U.S. platforms are in the mix for some of the things they're considering. And some of that collaboration for them is really maritime. And I will tell you, for most of our partners, domain awareness, maritime domain awareness is something that's high on their list. And I think one of the best ways you do maritime domain awareness is from the air. And so when I talk to them about maritime domain awareness, we have capability that actually looks around, and we can probably see more from the air than you can from the surface. And so that's how I get my foot in the door in some of this. Thailand. We've had a long-term relationship with Thailand, over 200 years. And I was in Thailand here before the first of the year for Cope Tiger. Actually, right after the first year for Cope Tiger. It's a long-standing exercise. We've been on for well over 30 years. And really, it's an opportunity to work with them to build their capability and, again, have our foot in the door with a partner in the region. Security in Oceania. We work first in close coordination with Australia and New Zealand, and in some aspects Japan as well, to strengthen our things in Oceania. And I've had a chance to actually travel to Oceania. I've been to Palau, Kwajalein, and Chuuk. I will tell you, when I took this job, I had no idea where Chuuk was. My staff that briefed Chuuk in a meeting, and I go, okay, can someone pull up a map so I can see where they're talking about? And it's Truk Island from World War II. But I went there for the 75th anniversary of Operation Hailstone and spoke to an audience that was probably about this size of the left side of the room. But it was all with state, interior, NSC, and it's all about competition. And it's important that we look at those states in Micronesia and how we work together, not only us with those particular island states, but also how we work with New Zealand, Australia, and their interest in Oceania. I had a chance to go to New Zealand, and they're getting ready to get P8s and probably going to buy C-130Js, so I talked to them about that, and that was my launch point to get down to Antarctica. And so I've checked the square. I've been to all 7 continents now. And it was really neat to go down there and understand the mission set. And I think the key part of that, it really turned the light bulb on for me. The capability we use to help research is the same capability we have to use in the Arctic. And so it's important that we kind of pay attention to that, and that's why I'm paying attention to it in the role that I'm in. And then Australia, long-term partner. We've celebrated over 100 years of mateship, and I've got a chance to get to know the past air chief pretty well. And the new air chief who just took over here earlier this month was a capstone classmate of mine. And I had a chance to talk to him last week as well. And I'll be going to Australia with General Goldfein here in about 2 weeks. I had a chance to go down to Avalon for their air show, and I did a series of speed dating with air chiefs, where I met with 12 air chiefs in half-hour blocks and got a chance to really get a good perspective of the region, as I had a chance to sit down and talk to the air chiefs and the representatives. The last is to create South Asia opportunities, and really this is focused on India. And we have some shared interest in India. I had a chance to visit India. They're a major defense partner. I was there for exercise Cope India, and it's a fighter exercise. It was the first time we've done it in 10 years. Just so happened the Russians were also doing an exercise the week prior. I will tell you, we got a lot more press. And very well-received exercise. And I think there's greater opportunity there with India. It may take a little bit of time. But I think there's opportunities there with India. Now, implementing these strategies, I think the key part for this is, I think the difference between these glossy brochures, all the buzzwords, is action. And we got to take action on how we do things. That's one thing I push my staff on. We got to quit admiring and writing these glossy brochures, strategy documents. We got to start tracking progress to implementing the strategy. And so what we're doing is trying to move those ideas from a concept to reality, and kind of changing our thought process. And it's really, as we look at the 5th generation capability, that we already have in the region with F-22s and F-35s, but what we'll continue to bring in, it's really, to me, it's kind of changing the mindset of how we integrate that into our mindset about how we operate. And so I'm developing kind of a vision for 5th generation Air Force or Air Force mindset. It's based on concepts like agile combat employment, revised C2 models, multi-domain operations, and even using the Royal Australian Air Force's Jericho initiative. Now, agile combat employment is one of those concepts that we've been refining, and it's been based on what General Karloff started when he was in this position as Rapid Raptor, and we've continued to expand on that. I think in the adversaries that we face in a high-end conflict, I can guarantee will be contested, and we'll have degraded communications that we'll have to deal with. So in order to maintain an advantage of the joint force, we need to instill doubt in the mind of our adversary. And I think the proven ability for me to move capability around fairly quickly not only me as the air component, but our marine component's thinking the same thing, our maritime component's thinking the same thing, and our soft component's thinking the same thing, and even our land component's thinking the same thing. Challenge there is logistics, and I'll get to that in a second. But the key part of this is to instill doubt in our adversary that we have the capability to move very quickly and distribute our capabilities so not everything's at risk. So one of my goals here is to understand airfield capability and capacity throughout the region. And if I can operate from every airfield that has the capability to support either ISR, mobility, or fighter capability, and have a good understanding of that, and prove it, then my adversary has to account for it. And so that's one of my goals. I want to be able to have small groups of multifunctional airmen that can rapidly generate air power. And that's taking into account an agile force capable of generating air power from multiple locations and requires kind of a different C2 that's within the AOR. I've really got to be able to trust airmen to do their jobs that they've been trained for, and I got to allow them to do stuff that above and beyond their specialty code. Okay, and so part of that is actually how do you actually and allow them to take some initiative and take some measured risks to make things happen and not wait for instructions. I think it'll require some advanced planning concepts and logistical supply lines in C2 to make sure that we're lean, agile, and connected more than ever. Going back to logistics, one of the things that when you look at agile combat deployment, it is logistically intensive, and I understand that. But it doesn't stop me from actually pursuing the concept. And I think part of it is breaking down some models the way we've done business in the past as we look at it. When you look at the size of the AOR, we have islands that are hundreds of thousands of miles apart. And so when I look at the logistics, it's not just an Air Force problem, it's a joint problem. And how do we actually work this through the joint force logistically? Because I think there are common use items that we're going to be interested in: fuel, munitions, and parts. And when I look at the F-35, for example, with the various models of the F-35, A, B, and C, they don't all have the same parts. Okay, and so how do you work that supply chain to support F-35? So one F-35 is not like all F-35s. But the munitions might all be the same. And how do I actually take advantage of that? And the fuel definitely is the same. Okay, and how do I take advantage of that? And so those are the things I'm thinking about associated when we look at logistics. I think the key part of logistics is the planning has to go in advance. And part of that is those decisions that we can't make at time of conflict need to be made now. And so how do you actually look at pre-positioning? And the way I look at it, I need to be pre-positioning now and not waiting to actually execute a tip fit. And those are the things I'm thinking about as we move forward. I think that pre-position will help us buy down risk and create those challenges for our adversary that we're ready. And those are the things I'm thinking about. From a C2 perspective, I think in a high-end fight, we're going to have to, the structure might change the same, but our mindset needs to change. And part of that is looking at authorities and mechanisms to have kind of conditions-based authorities. And I think part of that is commander's intent, and that really starts with me. And I got to be able, in coordination with my other component commanders and with Indo-PACOM and Admiral Davidson, is to provide commander's intent beyond a 72-hour ATO cycle. Commander's intent with a scheme of maneuver. Enough that our airmen can actually go out and operate and execute and not have to wait and call back and wait for guidance, okay? I need to actually provide kind of long-term, so it's more than a paragraph that some of us are familiar with that we might put on a slide to brief. It is probably several pages that gets refined over time, and I continue to transmit that to ensure that they were able to execute. I think there's probably some predetermined if-then statements. If you see this, then knock yourself out. Go out and take action. And in some cases, use your judgment. And so I need to have command teams and commanders that are willing to kind of step out and make things happen, being willing to take a little bit of risk. Because I do believe that we'll have some aw shucks moments, but I'm okay with that. I'd rather us be out executing versus waiting for to get struck. I also think about multi-domain and multi-level security. So I'm thinking about all the different domains, but also how we share across those domains. And it's really thinking past the traditional domains of land, maritime, and air. It's really how we synchronize all the kinetic and non-kinetic aspects of this. And when I'm thinking about multi-domain, I'm thinking about more than just the traditional. I'm thinking about air, land, maritime, subsurface, electromagnetic spectrum, space, cyber, and I would say even SAP STO to me is like a domain in itself. Because there's certain folks that don't understand it and are not read into it. And it makes it challenging to execute if you don't have, you're not clued into it. When I look at multi-domain C2, I really look at it as C2 of multi-domain operations with all domain awareness. Because in my job, I care about all the domains based on the responsibilities I've been given by doctrine. What I really want to do is to make sure our commanders, with the multi-domain awareness and the ability to integrate those capabilities so they can synchronize with other commanders that have multi-domain capabilities with all domain awareness. And so it's how do we work together as a joint force with multi-domain? Because I will tell you, I think sometimes across the service, when we say multi-domain, depending on who you are, you look at multi-domain differently. We've got to make sure we are able to maintain that continuity, basically from the operation all the way down to the tactical level. And part of that is developing some concepts and leveraging some initiatives. And some of that is really, I think, space and cyber are probably two key areas that will help us do some of this. And it's an area that we've got to continue to work on and to build a level of comfort on how we're going to execute and use our space and cyber capabilities. Because I think they're going to be force multipliers. And so from my perspective at PACAF, I don't really care if it's developed my headquarters, developed within the Air Force, or developed with one of our partners. My goal is to use all of it and to try to take advantage of it and try to understand it. And so one of those areas that just came out of the Air Force was launching the Digital Air Force. That Secretary Donovan said that victory in combat will depend on us becoming a digital Air Force. Well, I believe that. And the expectation of the initiative is to establish tools to effectively generate and transmit information. And I think that's going to be important to us in a contested environment. There's concepts of the Digital Air Force that, that will drive us to how we organize and how we push information. And we got to have policies and procedures so the data is secure, visible, accessible, understandable, linked, and trusted. And of course, no good military thing would not have, wouldn't come to fruition unless you had an acronym, SFALT, which is somewhat appropriate. Secure, visible, accessible, understandable, linked, and trusted. And so we're, part of that is I'm driving and talking about some of those things and working with, the Air Force and others on how do we secure data, less so securing networks. So it's cloud services, it's open architectures and those things like that that will help us to be able to do that, to be able to share information and really to outthink and outmaneuver our adversaries in the information domain. I'm also looking at initiatives, one of our strongest allies, Australia, with their and their leadership and what they're learning from their Jericho Plan initiative. And this was started by the Air Force, and it's seamlessly how do you connect the Australian Air Force, Navy, Army, space, and cyber capabilities to harness the potential integrated force and empower their joint force to ensure sustainable level of capability. It's really how do you communicate? And how do you have this kind of fifth generation mindset as they bring in their F-35s? It's how do you not duplicate effort? And so that's part of the goal. And so what we're trying to do is actually learn from our partners. The neat part about, when I talk to some of our Air Forces in the region, they kind of turn the United States because we're a big Air Force. I go, I can learn some things from a small Air Force too, because you're maybe sometimes more nimble than we are. And the things that they do that I can learn from that we can take advantage of. So regardless of the source initiative, we need to change our approach to leadership and warfighting and driving a mindset that changes at all levels. And I've already kind of talked about how it starts at my level with commander's intent and my command teams, and I think that's something how we need to empower and trust our airmen to do their job and allow them to do even more and be willing to take some risk. And I'm okay with some of that. Just tell me what you're doing, and I will give me enough time to respond, and if I don't say anything, keep pressing. That's kind of my intent. And I really believe that success in that will, against our adversaries, will be, we got to get inside our own decision cycles and not slow ourselves down. So it's important that I don't slow them down from being able to do their job. And so with that, it's how we continually reassess the environment and the approaches of how we do business. So I open today's remarks with three numbers, 5, 44, and 60. 5, 4 in NDS, and the +1 to get us back to 5. 44% of the global trade is in the region, and 60% of the world's population that's in the region. So in the Indo-Pacific, depending on your perspective, one can see these numbers, 5, 44, and 60, as either a challenge or an opportunity. I see opportunity to build upon our commitment to stability and prosperity within the region with our partners. We can only pursue that opportunity, however, by challenging the status quo and the current trend lines. We have to adopt a ceaseless desire to never settle. We constantly have to challenge the facts and assumptions. That's one thing I talk to my staff. The facts and assumptions always change. So every day, go back and challenge the facts and assumptions. We have to be willing to learn from failure, innovate, and instill courage to adopt change. As President Truman once said, America was not built on fear. America was built on courage, on imagination, and unbeatable determination to do the job at the end. We got to be able to do the job at the end. And so with that, again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Hopefully some of the things I share with you will spur some questions. And I like to say, there's a questions and answer session. Usually it's question and opinion, because if I had an answer, we could all just wrap up and be on vacation someplace. So I'll stop there and ready to take questions.
Thank you. Michael Gordon, Wall Street Journal. Sir, you referred to the July 23rd episode in which the Russian and Chinese bombers engaged in a joint patrol, and I just had a couple of questions for you on that. They've been different accounts of that from the South Koreans and the Russians. What actually happened in that episode? Do you see this as a harbinger of deepening cooperation between China and Russia? And in the NDS, China and Russia are obviously highlighted as prospective threats, but are you preparing for a scenario where China and Russia work together and collaborate and perhaps in a military operation or coordinate their actions in different theaters? Because there's a tendency to think of a Taiwan problem and a Baltics problem, but not a joint China-Russia problem.
I do look at it. I mean, I see it as a harbinger of potential things that can happen in the future. You look at their participation in Vostok a year ago, and now you look at what just happened here, just a week or so ago. And so I do pay attention to that. And that's why when we talk about great power competition, China is our priority, but I also pay attention to Russia. And that's why I kind of highlight my comments, because I do see the potential for them to start operating together. And the fact that what happened here on the 23rd, and the fact prior to that the Russians actually circumnavigated Taiwan, we get a démarche for that. I don't know that I'm not in diplomatic channels. I'm not sure that the Chinese gave the Russians a démarche for circumnavigating Taiwan. So I do have a concern that they may start collaborating and working together, which will make it more challenging for us and our partners, and doing things that will actually drive a rift or a wedge in certain areas that will burn up bandwidth. We need to be focused on them and not on each other.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Sang-Min from Radio Free Asia. I have a question about North Korea. North Korea said missile they launched last week was a warning to South Korea because South Korea deployed F-35 jet and then conduct U.S. ROC military exercise. So how do you assess the F-35 jet is helpful for Korean security from the North Korea threat? One more question is about the Brazilian ACE, the U.S. and ROC joint military access between air forces, but it was suspended last year. So how was the military access readiness of U.S. ROC air forces after the Brazilian agency suspended?
Well, for the missiles, I mean, it gets concerning. I mean, we pay attention to it. It really hasn't changed our posture and our readiness associated with it. I think it's a bit of signaling from Kim Jong-un. And so we do pay attention to it. And so when any one of these times that these happen, we actually we get together and actually assess it as part of my role and support of General Abrams and Admiral Davidson making recommendations on how we may or may not change our posture. At the same time, we're talking to our partners, both South Korea and Japan in particular. From an exercise and bringing in the F-35, that's something that's been known for a while, so it's no surprise. And again, I think KJU uses these as an opportunity to do the things he wants to do to message back to us. And same thing when it comes to the exercise aspect. And so I guess I pay attention to it, and I don't necessarily change what we do because I still think we're ready. In my conversations with the 3-star that I have there supporting General Abrams, I think by and large we're sitting pretty good. We're probably not as vocal about some of the exercises we've had here recently, but the readiness I think still continues. Let me go over here.
Thank you so much for taking my question, sir. My name is Jennifer Leo Prehori, and I'm an editor with Air Force Magazine. My question goes back to Raytheon's JPALS program. So in February, their JPALS team spoke with us about the their hopes for selling the Pacific Air Forces on the idea of using JPALS for adaptive basing. So I was just wondering if any of those conversations have happened yet, and if so, what's your take on the proposition so far?
I have not had a conversation with Raytheon on that particular capability. I've talked very broadly, just like I did today, on kind of the things we're doing. So I'm interested in whatever industry and/or our partners have to help us be able to do this, to make us lighter and leaner. You go back. Either one of you. I'll get you in sequence.
Thanks. Patrick Tucker with Defense One. Earlier in July, Choi Jong-kun, the Secretary of Peace and Planning for the South Korean president in Aspen, said that there was going to be a resumption of U.S. joint military exercises with South Korea, but the live component would be decreased in favor of sort of simulated environments and virtual environment training. So can you spell out what the future exercises are going to be with the South Koreans, how they differ from the past, and is there any concern about change in readiness as you move to virtual platforms instead of live firing, if that's a thing?
You know, I think part of this is, you know, kind of a General Abrams response. But one of the things he's talked about is you maintain a lower readiness, but as we look at our exercises, changing the, you know, scope, scale, size, and timing of the exercises. And that's some of the things that we've done. And because I help support 7th Air Force by providing capability for some of their, you know, manpower to help run. So when I talk to General Wilsbach, my sense is we're from a readiness standpoint, we're doing okay. We're doing things maybe a little bit differently. And I think that's not all bad. The fact that we have to look at things a bit differently. And that's part of what I'm really trying to think about when you look at the Pacific is we can't use the same model we've always used, and we've got to have a little more flexibility about how we think and how we operate. So by and large, I think the exercise program continues. It looks a little bit different, but we're still maintaining a level of readiness.
Thank you, sir. Otto Kreischer with Sea Power Magazine. I want to broaden your scope a little bit to your air component commander role. You've mentioned a couple times the maritime issue. Most of your theater is maritime. How are you working with your naval components, taking advantage of whatever air assets they have stationed in theater and passing through? And the Air Force has a dedicated role throughout history of going against enemy shipping. Are you all working at all on that prospect? If we're up against the Chinese, we're going to have to take out a lot of their ships, and thankfully the Navy won't be able to do it all. So yeah. What's your role on the maritime, working with your Navy counterparts and possible anti-surface shipping work?
Well, to take your point, you're right, the Navy won't do it all, because I think the air power is going to be just as important as the Navy will be. And yes, it is mostly maritime, but a lot of it's air as well, like all of it's air. So from that perspective, though, Admiral Aquilino I've known him for a number of years, and what we've done is we really have increased the tempo between PACAF and PAC Fleet on integrated operations, and the discussions on how we would actually do joint war at sea, and the capabilities we would need in order to assist their perspectives of what they need, at the same time the things we need to do to be able to affect the campaign. And so not only from you know, just kind of a C2 aspect, but also from a weapon standpoint, you know, whether it's defensive or offensive mining, or you know, LRASM, for example, to go after Chinese ships. So the whole perspective of how we do this, and so that's part of the conversation we're having. You know, and as we do our exercises, like REMPAC and others, and Northern Edge that just occurred here here a couple of months ago. We actually had a carry up for Northern Edge, so we're still starting to really increase our capability in working with PAC Fleet to focus on not only you know, Indo-Pacific, but really our staffs to work more closely together.
Hey, sir. Oriana Pollock here with military.com. You had mentioned earlier that you're looking much more closely at the Arctic and looking to apply lessons from the Arctic to the Antarctic. But as you also said, they're very different, ones used solely for research, at least for right now. So I was wondering if you could speak more to how you are, looking to apply these lessons from the Arctic to the Antarctic, if that means an expanded U.S. military presence in the future, potential exercises down there, and what the Antarctic looks like from a military perspective in, say, 5 to 10 years' time.
Well, I think it's some of the capabilities we have and don't have a lot of. Icebreakers, for example. LC-130s. There's not a lot of those. And we use all those and talking. I spent quite a bit of time with the New York Air National Guard unit that flies the LC-130s and talked about their year and what they do. And the challenge is there's only 10 of them. And if we're going to be challenged in Arctic and Antarctic, we actually need to preserve that capability. We may need more. The same thing with icebreakers. Compared to, Russia has a number of icebreakers, much more than we do. China has an icebreaker. And so part of that aspect is how do we think about the capabilities we require for the Arctic and the Antarctic. When I look at Antarctica, the fact that that treaty ends in 2048 and the Russians already have a presence, the Chinese have a small presence. Matter of fact, the week I was going down to Antarctica, the Chinese icebreaker was coming down to the ice and hit an iceberg and had some National Science Foundation capability on it. Instead of going back into New Zealand to get repaired, it went all the way back to China. Coincidence? Makes me a little suspect. And so that's the aspect that we got to be paying attention to is what is everybody's motive when they come down to Antarctica, particularly when that treaty gets re-looked at in 2048. And so those are the things that I'm thinking about that we collectively all need to be thinking about.
Hi, I'm Doug Greenlaw from Research Innovations Incorporated. Thanks for your remarks. Very informed, very helpful. China is executing a concerted incremental strategy in the competitive phase. It's long-term and I would say quite coherent, whole of government. Every operation activity or an investment that we undertake in this phase has an impact. How do we assess the impact and how do we know if we're gaining or losing ground in the long-term strategy?
I wish I knew. I mean, this is the challenge I see is when we start talking about competition is how we are able to measure competition. And it's less about, in some aspects, it's not only how we measure, but it's how do we actually predict competition so we can actually make sure we're doing the right things as a whole of government or whole of governments within the region so we can, cut them off at the pass. And that to me is challenging. And as we talk about it, matter of fact, I'm visiting with RAND tomorrow to spend 2 hours to talk about competition because they've written a couple papers about it. And, each one of us look at the word competition a little bit differently. When I look at from a DoD perspective in Title 10, there's only so many things I can do. It's really more dependent on the other instruments of power, diplomatic, information, economic, more so than it is military. But I think I contribute to that, and I definitely don't want to mess it up. And so how do I make sure I'm doing things to actually maintain a level of readiness, maintain a level of awareness, and also compete to make the Chinese think about it. So that's why I think agile combat deployment is one of those areas that helps us to compete to an aspect. But I think it's really hard to measure. Until you go back and, after things have happened to go, how did they respond? And then go, okay, that probably worked. Do we need to do more of that? Or how do they adjust based on what we did? And so that's why I say, challenging the facts and assumptions are important because you do it once, it may work the first time, but it may not work the second time. And then the last piece I'd offer is we got to have patience. China's in this for the long haul. We've got to be in long-term competition. It's not just something we're going to finish in a couple of years and be done. This is going to go on for a while, and we got to look at it that way. Yeah.
Hi, sir. I'm Pat Host from Janes. Japan wants to develop a new fighter jet. What capabilities should they prioritize in this new aircraft? And do you have any thoughts on how they should structure this procurement?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Japan, but I will tell you the things I would like for them to have is interoperability with the systems that we have today. And I would say, if they do it indigenously and build their own platform, I know they want to make sure that it stays interoperable with the rest of the self-defense force. I want the same thing to have it interoperable with our forces as well. And so to me, if I had one criteria, that would be it, is to make sure it's interoperable. Because if it's a closed-off system, then it makes it hard for us to operate together.
Thanks. Can I ask you about the icebreakers real quick? Obviously, you're an Air Force and not a Sea Force. Is this you're hoping that the Navy or the Coast Guard would get more icebreakers so that they could be used in the region? Could you clarify that?
Well, I think we got to have the capability. So it's really the Coast Guard. So they've got, like 1.5. It's the one that runs, and I think they got some money coming in to get another, but that doesn't do a whole lot for you. And so we got to be thinking about that if we want to have that capability. Yeah.
Thank you. John Turpak, Air Force Magazine. Want to ask you about the fight tonight, fight next week aspect of your job. It'll be a while before you get plenty of fifth-gen fighters. What are you thinking about as the most urgent fourth-gen upgrades that you need for your theater? And on a related note, how are you doing getting more tanking support for your theater?
Yeah, so fourth gen, it's not just about the the platforms themselves when you start talking airplanes, but it's also, to me, the C2 capability. Because I still think we're kind of in a fourth gen kind of C2 capability where we're really focused on networks. And I'm really more interested in how we protect the data. Because when I build a network, I've got to build a separate network. In cases, you'll have to build networks for that you can build for yourself, networks that can share with your partners, and so you build these networks that take a lot of time. If we were able to now, do the metadata and then track the data, and then the other aspect of this is moving it over commercial lines, and the data's protected, then I can help maybe hide in plain sight. So it's a different. That's one area how I think moving forward from a kind of fourth to fifth gen. From a fourth gen perspective, the other piece I'm concerned about is capacity. And that capacity has to do with, as you highlighted, tankers. And because the size of the AOR, tanking's a big deal for me. And that's an area that more tankers is better. And so that's an area that I've talked about it in previous forums, but ensuring that we have tanker capability, because I watch what we do on a day-to-day basis as we move aircraft around the AOR. And the tankers, I wouldn't say are a limiting factor, but I realize the challenge we'll have if we go to full-up conflict with the distances we have of being able to move capability back and forth with tankers, not only tankers, but tactical lift as well. And that'll be very helpful for as we work agile combat deployment.
Could you highlight, though, maybe some of the fourth-gen capabilities, munitions or EW that would really most help you when you're
Well, EW for sure, because that's going to complicate any one of our adversaries, just like it would complicate things for us. And then critical munitions. And so precision munitions that are, and standoff capability with some of those munitions that we use in the maritime, like LRASM, and other capabilities like that will actually be helpful for us to be able to fight this particular fight.
So Ron Cleaves from F-35 program. Admiral Richardson, CNO, was at the Mitchell Institute back on 2nd of July, and he talked about space is heating up. What is your concern from a C2 perspective of potentially anti-denial of space for you and your communication, your C2?
I'm already thinking. I mean, I know it's going to happen. It's just a matter to what level. And so, as we look at different capability to put a number of more satellites in a low Earth orbit, that'll actually give us a bit of redundancy. It won't do everything for us, but it actually will help. And that's the aspect I think we need to be thinking about kind of going forward, is the more we put up there, the more redundancy we might have. And on top of that, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, the stuff that we can actually ride and encrypt on commercial or civil may be another way to actually help ourselves out in that regard. I think that the one value of all this discussion about space is that, everything was so super classified that no one knew what was going on in space except for those that worked in Space Command. Now we're to a point where we open up that aperture, and even I get read into some stuff now that I had not been read into before. So now I can actually pull those pieces and parts together and go, okay, so now first is going, hey, trust it, it's all good. Now they can tell me, oh, it's not as good as you think it is. And oh, by the way, we can start talking about what our adversaries, and have a deeper understanding. And so I think across the joint force, we have a better understanding of our capabilities and the risk in space that we haven't had before, because of the conversations we've been having. Yeah.
Ephraim Rivers with a retired Air Force engineer. Thank you for bringing up the total force concept with the Air National Guard. Served 10 active and 18 in the Air Guard. We're working resiliency, work for Johnson Controls. As an industry partner, we're doing a lot of work out in the Pacific right now to ensure with the man-made situations with kinetic challenges as well as natural disasters when you brought up the storms. We're working hard to help with resiliency out there. As you face those challenges, from a resiliency perspective, any particular ways forward that you see in some of your team members to prepare for those?
Not particularly. I think if I had one thing to say about it is we got to be willing to operate in conditions a little bit differently than we have. And so when folks talk about going and building out a base, the base in the Pacific to me is a ramp, a runway with a ramp, and we get places we can put some fuel and some gas, okay, and then we can go from there. And so we got to get away from the mindset of if we're going to be resilient, the resiliency is not the everything in the kitchen sink. You got to have you got to lower your expectations on what capability you're going to have, and this is why this is allowing our airmen to think a little bit differently and being able to take a little bit of risk. Go, hey, you're not going to have everything you're going to need, so how would you do this? How would you actually get yourself back into be resilient with a minimum amount of capability? And so part of this is when we exercise and we do some of our agile combat employment aspects in our exercises, we do certain things as a forcing function to go, hey, everything's got to fit in a C-130 for the first 6 ship. Okay, and then after that, you get on the ground, you test it, and then you go, okay, you can bring all your other stuff and you can play with everything. But it's a way for us to actually work some of these concepts and get our airmen to start thinking differently about how they do this so they don't go, my hands are tied because I didn't bring everything. Well, in combat, you're not going to have everything, and I expect you to figure out how to do that. And that resiliency needs to be somewhat self-induced, in addition to some of the things that we want to be able to do to, from a technology standpoint.
Oh, thank you for coming. Mitsuo Nakai is my name, Reagan Foundation. What is our future air power or technology beyond F-35? I'm talking about drone technologies. Where do we stand for that?
Well, one of the things the Air Force just tested here is kind of your Valkyrie, kind of your loyal wingman. And so now you have a manned platform with a man-unmanned teaming is one area to go down the path there. And that decreases risk to some of our personnel. And having a attritable capability like that, the thing you got to think about is the cost curve associated with that. I was just talking to somebody else about that. Okay, so how many do we attrit before we go, we can't afford this anymore? And now we don't have any capability because it's all been attrited. So those are the things we got to be thinking about kind of going forward. So that's one area that I'm thinking about. I think the other I didn't highlight in the comments, but as we do all this moving around the theater, and one of my jobs is I'm the Air Defense Commander. So I'm responsible for missile defense. There are not enough THAADs and Patriots to do all the things we think we need to do where everybody thinks they're going, to include PACAF. And that's why I told my staff, you can't go everywhere because you don't have the capability to protect yourself. And so, the other aspect of this is how do we take advantage of hypersonics and directed energy? When I think about directed energy, if I could take directed energy and put a small directed energy that can cover 200 to 300 nautical miles, I can put a bubble around several islands and be able to operate with a level of confidence. So it's a different mindset for how we do things today that we got to be looking at from that regard as well. Oh, over here.
My name's Steve Travers, sir. When thinking about Taiwan, when you are asked for recommendations on what we should do with regard to either training with Taiwan or equipping Taiwan, what are some of the key considerations you have to take into account when you make a recommendation related to that?
Well, typically I don't really get asked for a recommendation on those. Those are decided above me or around me. Part of our discussion though is how do you make them a tough target? Yes. And I think the same thing for us. How do we make ourselves a tough target so the Chinese don't want to go after us? And same thing with our partners, whether it be Japan, Philippines, Australia. And so, part of the discussion here most recently with Taiwan and their pursuit of additional F-16s, the capability you provide them will make them a tougher target, will make the China maybe think twice about going after. And so those are the kinds of things that we think about, and initially get in conversation with Taiwan about it, but it's one of those, for every one of our partners there, if you make yourself a tough target, you're able to backstop some of that diplomacy and the other instruments of power versus getting rolled over. Wrong.
Jennifer White with NHK Japan Broadcasting Corporation. How do you assess China's growing air fighting capability as they fielded the J-20, and how should the U.S. respond to these advancements?
Well, they have increasing capability. That's true, and maybe increasing numbers. They don't have the airmen like we have, and that's to me is our advantage. They don't have partners like we have. Now, I got a question earlier about Russia. I get a little bit concerned about that, and they start working together. But we have, from a capability standpoint, I think we're even, maybe not, but not so much in numbers and quantity in some aspects. But I think we have airmen that can actually go operate without extensive command and control. And I do still believe that we are probably still too tightly controlled, where airmen may not step out and go do things that I think I want them to be able to go do, particularly in a contested communications environment. And so this is where I'm kind of focused in that regard. But I am paying attention to the growing Chinese capability and where and how they might use it, and their level of confidence to do things. And so one of the things I've found in the time that I've been in this job is I've talked to the staff and folks that have been around for a while, the Chinese continue to push the envelope a little bit at a time to see kind of how we will respond and react. And it goes into, the H-6s didn't fly with the water much. They fly with the water pretty much every day now. They weren't flying with the Russians. Now they are. And so those are the things I got to be paying attention to so I can understand kind of how they're going to operate, how they're going to use those capabilities or not use those capabilities, so I can actually, be prepared for it, but also create a level of doubt in their mind about how well they're going to be able to execute, which will maybe kind of win before fighting.
Well, General Brown, I tell you what, you already pointed at them. So
Yeah, I'll go take a last.
question.
All right. Make it an easy one.
Hi, General Brown. Pop's all good. Used to work with you a little bit in the Pentagon. Yeah. You talk about all the dispersal of forces to enhance survivability and those kinds of things. So what would you see in the future as the critical multi-domain command and control nodes and the critical connections associated with those to enable you to survive and operate, generate power, so on and so forth?
I think there's a capability capacity that's already somewhat developed. We may not have taken full advantage of it. And what I look at is, I look at our soft partners and talking to some of them. They can operate from any place in the world. I don't know how they get connected, but they get connected. And it's usually smaller than a bread box. That's the kind of capability I want to have for our airmen. And really be able to give that to our squadron commanders, group and wing commanders, so they can actually have that capability. The other aspect, the way I think about this is that not only my commander's intent, like I talked about, but for those of us that have flown, I think about it like ATIS. I need to be continuing transmitting. Here's the scheme of maneuver. Here's what I'm thinking. You may catch bits and pieces when you're connected, but you have enough information to go out and execute. And that's the part of, how do I actually, be able to continue to transmit that. So they actually have several different nodes of how that might come in. So you don't have a single network, and that network goes down, then you're kind of dead. You have different, and it almost should be transparent to the operator in the field. So they don't have to flip on this switch and that switch. It basically comes into a box, and it sorts it all out, and it's multi-level security. It's like a thermos. It just knows. That's what I'm looking for. So, from.
General Brown, thanks very much for that wonderful tour de force of the Pacific AOR. And when Otto raised this question, it reminded me of the retort we often make when the our naval brethren get a little bit too muscular in talking about how water covers 60% of the AORs. It's important to remind them that 100% is covered by air. 100% of it's covered by air. You have a long trip back, and so we've got a bit of a book I think you might enjoy. It's by Bud Anderson, Last Remaining Age from World War II. And he's still kicking and doing very well, and we thought it's something that you might enjoy reading on your covering those 16 time zones going home. So,
Thanks, Dave.
thanks very
Appreciate
much.
it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.